She stumbled and fell into his arms, the most powerful man at the five-star hotel. But what seemed like an accident soon revealed a secret that would change her life forever. If you enjoy love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. Every day we post videos like this continuing. The Grand Plaza stood majestically in the heart of London, a fortress of glass and marble that seemed to touch the sky. There, where luxury was commonplace and appearances dictated people's worth, Helen Miller had learned to be invisible. 26 years old, with olive skin and deep brown, eyes that hid dreams larger than her salary allowed, she adjusted her impeccable bun and took a deep breath before starting another shift at the hotel's reception. "Good morning, Miss Miller." The grave voice of manager Arthur Davies echoed through the still empty lobby. "We have important guests arriving. I want everything impeccable." "As always, sir." Helen forced a smile. 6 years working in that place had taught her to smile, even when she felt like screaming. Her life was divided between her shifts at the hotel and caring for her younger brother, Matthew, 17 years old. Diagnosed with a rare genetic syndrome at 12, the boy needed expensive medication and constant monitoring. Since their parents' death in a car accident 4 years ago, it had been just the two of them against the world. A receptionist's salary didn't cover all expenses, but Helen stretched herself with overtime. The hotel offered a reasonable health plan, and she had managed to secure a social scholarship for her brother's treatment at a specialized clinic. It wasn't enough, but it was what she had. On that May morning, the air conditioning fought against the heat that gripped the city. The reception moved at its usual pace, hurried executives, families with too much luggage, honeymooning couples who only had eyes for each other. Helen registered check-ins and check-outs with the precision of a well-tuned machine. "Miss, could you bring me more towels?" a guest asked without looking up from her phone. "The ones in my room aren't soft enough." "Of course, madam. I'll contact housekeeping immediately." Helen maintained a professional tone as she typed the request into the system. It was the third complaint about towels from that same guest in 2 days. Sometimes Helen wondered if those people realized there were human beings behind the immaculate uniforms. Probably not. To many, she was just another detail of the decor, as functional as the marble counter where they rested their black cards. When the clock struck 4 in the afternoon, the lobby was relatively quiet. Helen took the opportunity to check messages on her phone. Matthew was fine, the caregiver said. He had eaten properly and taken his medication on time, a small victory on an ordinary day. That's when the automatic doors opened, and the unusual invaded the Grand Plaza. A tall man, approximately 35 years old, with disheveled dark hair and a 5 o'clock shadow, entered the lobby. He wore worn jeans, a plain blue cotton shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and hiking boots that had seen better days. Beside him, a huge golden German shepherd walked unleashed, defying all the establishment's rules. The contrast was almost comical. In an environment where executives in Italian suits and women in exclusive jewelry moved as if on a runway, this man seemed to have stepped out of a mountain trail. Helen noticed the disapproving glances from other guests and staff. The security guard at the entrance took a step forward but hesitated when the dog looked his way. Instinctively, Helen stepped out from behind the counter. It was her job to prevent awkward situations in the hotel lobby. "Excuse me, sir," she approached with a polite smile. "May I help you? I believe you might be looking for—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The dog, seeing her approach, darted towards her with enthusiasm. Helen recoiled, losing her balance on her uniform heels. She braced for impact against the marble floor, but it never came. Instead, she felt strong arms catching her by the waist. "Apollo, sit." The man's voice was firm, but gentle. The dog obeyed immediately, sitting with its tongue out, seeming to smile. Helen, still in the stranger's arms, found herself looking directly into his eyes. They were an intense green, almost translucent, framed by laugh lines that suggested someone who smiled frequently. For an instant, that seemed to stretch beyond normal time. Neither of them moved. Helen felt the warmth of his hands on her waist, the scent of a subtle cologne mixed with something more natural, as if he had spent the day outdoors. There was an intensity in his gaze that left her breathless. "Are you all right, madam?" he asked, finally breaking the silence without letting her go. "Yes, Helen composed herself, pulling away with her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I apologize for the inconvenience, sir, but I must inform you that we do not allow animals on hotel premises except for guide dogs." The man smiled, and his laugh lines deepened. "Apollo is a service dog, perhaps unconventional, but I have all the necessary documentation." Helen noticed that everyone was watching the scene. Arthur, the manager, was approaching with a stern expression. She needed to resolve the situation quickly. "I understand, sir. Even so, we need to follow protocols. I can check if we have available accommodations and—" "I have a reservation," he interrupted her, without losing his smile. "Under the name of Raphael Wolf." The name meant nothing to Helen, but something in the man's posture made her return to the counter and type the surname into the system. The data that appeared on the screen almost made her choke. Presidential suite, indefinite reservation, advance payment with a black card. "Pardon the confusion, Mr. Wolf, your suite is ready." She tried to sound professional despite her surprise. "Would you like me to accompany you there?" "I'd prefer you to accompany me if it's no trouble." His smile now held a hint of amusement, as if he was enjoying the confusion he caused. Helen looked at Arthur, who nodded stiffly. Protocol dictated attending to VIP guests' requests, no matter how strange. In the private elevator leading to the penthouse, the silence weighed heavily. Helen kept her eyes fixed on the numbers lighting up on the panel, too aware of the man's presence beside her. The dog sat between them, as well behaved as if at a dog show. "First time at the Grand Plaza?" She tried to make conversation, more to break the awkward silence than out of genuine interest. "Not exactly," he replied vaguely, watching her in the reflection of the metallic elevator doors. When they reached the penthouse, Helen opened the door to the presidential suite and stepped aside, allowing him to enter first. The 300-square-meter space offered a panoramic view of London. Living room, office, 2 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, jacuzzi, private sauna, and a wine cellar with exclusive labels. "I hope you find everything in order, Mr. Wolf. If you need anything, just call reception." Helen maintained her professional tone despite her growing curiosity. He walked around the room, touching surfaces as if evaluating the quality of the materials. The dog explored the corners, sniffing every inch of the immaculate carpet. "Do you have a name?" he asked suddenly, turning to face her. The question caught her off guard. "Helen Miller, sir." "Helen," he repeated, as if testing how the name sounded in his voice. "Thank you for your help, Helen. I'm sure we'll see each other again." There was something in the way he said that, a quiet certainty that made her stomach flip. Helen nodded politely and left, feeling his gaze on her back until the elevator doors closed. Returning to reception, she was greeted by the curious glances of her colleagues. "Who is that guy?" Denise, another receptionist, asked. "He looks like he just came from a campsite." "And that dog? How did they let it in?" George, from concierge, joined the conversation. "He's a VIP guest," Helen replied vaguely, resuming her position behind the counter. In the following days, the penthouse guest, as he came to be called by the staff, became the main topic in the corridors. Raphael Wolf maintained strange habits. He woke at sunrise, had coffee at the local cafe instead of the hotel's 5-star restaurant, spent hours walking his dog in the nearby park, and refused room service, preferring to clean his own space. Other guests made no secret of their disdain. "The black card tramp," they whispered when he passed through the lobby, always in the same simple clothes, always with Apollo beside him. Helen observed everything with growing fascination. There was something about that man that defied all the unwritten rules of the Grand Plaza's world of appearances. On the 4th night after his arrival, she was about to end her shift when Raphael appeared at reception, without the dog for the first time. "Good evening, Helen," he greeted her as if they were old acquaintances. "Mr. Wolf, how can I help you?" She maintained professionalism, ignoring her colleagues' glances. "I need a restaurant recommendation. Something authentic, not touristy." Helen hesitated. It wasn't uncommon for guests to ask for recommendations, but they usually wanted sophisticated places, not authentic ones. "Well, There's a hole-in-the-wall eatery and borough market that serves the best feijoada in the city on Saturdays. It's called Dora's Corner. It's not luxurious, but... Perfect, he smiled. Have you had dinner? Yet? The question caught her off guard. She was used to subtle flirting from guests, but this felt different. There was no malice in his eyes, just genuine interest. I'm just leaving now, she replied cautiously, but thank you for the invitation. It wasn't an invitation, he laughed. At least not yet. I just wanted to know if you know the place from personal experience. She relaxed a little. I do. My brother loves the feijoada there. You have a brother. There was real interest in his voice. I do. Helen didn't usually talk about her personal life with guests, but something about him made her lower her guard. Matthew, 17 years old. Raphael nodded, as if filing away the information. Thank you for the recommendation, Helen. Good night. She watched him leave, intrigued by the brief encounter. There was something different about that man, something she couldn't quite pinpoint. The next day, during her afternoon shift, Raphael appeared again at reception, this time with Apollo. I need another favor, he said, without mincing words. I've noticed that some guests seem uncomfortable with my presence. Helen bit her lip, unsure how to respond. It was true. The disapproving glances became more evident each day. They're just people accustomed to certain standards, she explained diplomatically. Exactly. He smiled. And I clearly don't know those standards. Could you help me with that? The request caught her off guard. Help you how, exactly? Teach me the unwritten rules, how not to look like a complete outsider in this world. Helen blinked, surprised by his honesty. I'm not sure that would be appropriate. I can pay for your time, he suggested, but seeing her expression, he quickly added, or not. Consider it an exchange. You teach me how to behave in this world, and well, we'll figure out what I can offer in return. There was something vulnerable in his request that touched Helen, perhaps because, despite working in that environment for years, she herself had never truly felt part of it. I have a lunch break tomorrow, she heard herself say before she could think better of it. We could talk at the Park Cafe across the street. His smile lit up his face. It's a date. The next day, Helen arrived at the cafe 5 minutes before the scheduled time. She wore her work uniform, as she would return directly to the hotel. Raphael was already there, occupying a table in the back, with Apollo lying beside him. He waved when he saw her. Punctual, he commented when she sat down. Should I write that down as the first rule? Helen couldn't help but smile. Punctuality is universal, Mr. Wolfe, not exclusive to luxurious environments. Raphael, he corrected, if we're going to do this, we need to drop the formalities. She hesitated. Calling a guest by their first name was breaking protocol, but they were outside the hotel and this wasn't exactly a conventional situation. Raphael, she repeated, testing how the name sounded. He smiled, seemingly satisfied. So where do we begin, Professor? Helen pulled a worn notebook from her bag. You'll laugh, but I actually have some notes. I call it Practical Rules for Not Embarrassing Yourself in Fancy Places. Raphael raised his eyebrows, genuinely surprised. You wrote a manual. Let's just say I learned a few things working at the plaza. She shrugged. I observe a lot. It's part of my job. Then teach me. There was a disarming sincerity in his request. For an hour, Helen explained the subtleties of the world she observed daily. How true wealth, rarely flaunted brand names, how the most powerful were often the most polite to staff, the differences between wines that no one really noticed, but everyone pretended to notice. Raphael listened with genuine interest, asking occasional questions, laughing at her more biting observations. There was a sharp intelligence behind those green eyes, a quick understanding that intrigued her more and more. Why does this matter so much to you? She asked, finally, when the hour was almost over. You obviously have money, the black card doesn't lie. Why care what people think? Raphael was silent for a few moments, idly, stroking Apollo's head. Let's just say I'm conducting some field research. What kind of research? He smiled, but this time the smile didn't reach his eyes. About authenticity. about how people change when they discover certain details about you. There was something more there, an untold story, but Helen knew how to recognize boundaries. Her phone rang, reminding her she needed to return to work. "I have to go," she said, standing up. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, with a casualness that seemed rehearsed. Helen knew she should refuse. She was crossing a fine line between professional and personal, but curiosity got the better of her. "Same time," she agreed before turning and walking back to the hotel, feeling the weight of his gaze on her back. Little did she know that that lunch would be just the first of many encounters, and that her life was about to change forever. What began as a casual lunch in the park quickly became a daily ritual. Helen and Raphael met during lunch hour, always at the same cafe, always with Apollo lying patiently beside the table. The impromptu lessons in etiquette and social behavior gradually gave way to deeper conversations, freer laughter, longer glances. Helen discovered that Raphael was an excellent listener. Unlike the guests at the plaza who talked incessantly about themselves, he asked questions about her life with genuine interest. He wanted to know about Matthew, about the dreams she had in adolescence, about the small pleasures that kept her strong on difficult days. "Did you always want to be a hotel receptionist?" he asked during one of these meetings, as they shared a slice of lemon pie. Helen laughed. "Of course not. I wanted to be an architect. I even started university, but I had to drop out. When my parents died, Matthew needed me." "And now? Do you still think about it?" She hesitated. "Sometimes, but it's hard to balance work, caring for Matthew, and studies. Maybe one day, when he's more stable." Raphael nodded thoughtfully. "What would you change about the plaza if you could redesign it?" The question caught her off guard. Helen had never shared her observations about the hotel's architecture with anyone, the small inefficiencies she had noticed over the years, the spaces that could be more functional or welcoming. "Many things," she replied, surprised by the enthusiasm in her own voice. "The lobby layout, for example. It's visually impressive but terrible for people flow, and the rooms have huge windows with wonderful views, but the soundproofing leaves much to be desired." For almost half an hour, Helen spoke about changes she would make, while Raphael listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated surprising knowledge about architecture and design. "You know quite a lot about the subject for someone who—" She stopped, embarrassed. "For someone who looks like a lost country bumpkin at the plaza?" He finished, laughing. "Let's just say I have some diverse interests." There was always this air of mystery surrounding Raphael. He spoke about places he had visited, experiences he had, but rarely mentioned his profession or how he made a living. Helen knew she should ask directly, but she feared breaking the spell of those encounters. At the hotel, rumors about the penthouse guest continued. Some said he was an eccentric heir. Others bet on an incognito foreign football player. The most fanciful theories involved witness protection programs and secret agents. Helen guarded her conversations with Raphael like small treasures, protected from the curious glances of her colleagues. Only Louis, the hotel bartender and a longtime friend, knew about the daily meetings. "You're getting too involved, Lena," he warned one night, as she sipped juice at the empty bar after her shift. "This guy is a mystery. No one knows who he really is." "We're just talking, Louis. It's nothing serious." "The way your eyes sparkle when you talk about him says otherwise." Helen didn't answer. She didn't want to admit, even to herself, that she was developing feelings for Raphael, feelings that went beyond initial curiosity, beyond the friendship that had grown between them in recent weeks. Louis sighed, distractedly wiping a glass. "Just be careful." "Okay. You know how these rich guys are. For them, people like us are pastimes." Her friend's words bothered her more than she cared to admit. Was it true? Was Raphael just amusing himself with the naive receptionist? The next day she arrived at the cafe with a certain reserve. Raphael noticed immediately. "Is something wrong?" he asked as soon as she sat down. Helen considered lying but opted for the truth. "I'm confused about this. What exactly are we doing?" Raphael was silent for a few moments, his green eyes studying her intently. I thought we were getting to know each other, becoming friends. Is that all because it's been almost a month that we've met every day and I still know very little about you?" He seemed genuinely surprised. "What do you want to know? To start, what do you do for a living? How can you afford to stay in the presidential penthouse indefinitely?" Raphael looked away for the first time since they met. "I work in property development." "What kind of properties?" "Various kinds." He paused. "Helen, there are things about me that I prefer not to share yet. Not because I want to deceive you, but because I like the way you look at me now. And how do I look at you? As if I were just a man, not a title, not a bank account, just Raphael." There was a vulnerability in his voice that disarmed her. Helen wanted to insist, wanted clear answers, but something in his gaze made her back down. "All right," she conceded, "but I can't stay in this limbo forever." "Fair enough?" He nodded, seeming relieved. "How about a deal? This weekend, let me meet your brother. Show me a little more of your life. And I promise that soon you'll know more about mine." The proposal caught her by surprise. Introducing Raphael to Matthew meant bringing him into her real world, beyond park lunches and hotel lobby conversations. "My brother has an appointment at the clinic on Saturday morning," she said after a moment of hesitation. "Afterwards, we were planning to go to Hyde Park, if the weather permits. May I join you?" There was a sincere hope in his voice. "You may," she replied, surprising herself. "But no black cards or extravagances. We're simple people, Raphael." "I promise to behave," he smiled. And that smile made something churn in Helen's stomach. Saturday dawned with a perfectly blue sky, as if nature was conspiring in favor of the meeting. Helen woke early, more nervous than she cared to admit. She helped Matthew with his bath and morning medication, trying to act naturally while the boy bombarded her with questions about the mysterious hotel friend. Does he really have a huge dog and live in the penthouse? Is he like a prince in disguise? Matthew's eyes sparkled with excitement. Despite the condition that limited his movements and required constant care, Matthew maintained an insatiable curiosity about the world. "No princes, Matthew. He's just a guest who became a friend." Helen tried to sound casual as she meticulously chose her outfit. She opted for jeans, comfortable sneakers, and a simple blue cotton blouse. Casual, but well kept. The clinic was a 20-minute bus ride from the small apartment they shared in the Brixton neighborhood. The doctor, Dr. Paul, had been following Matthew since his diagnosis and had become almost part of the family. "The tests show stability," he informed after the consultation, his professional tone mixed with the affection of years of familiarity. "But we still need to monitor his liver markers, and physical therapy needs to continue 3 times a week." Helen nodded, making mental notes. The medications would cost almost half her salary next month, but she would manage. She always did. As they left the clinic, Raphael was waiting for them on the sidewalk wearing jeans, a simple white t-shirt and the same worn sneakers as always. Apollo was by his side, sitting patiently. Helen's heart quickened at the sight of him there, so casual and yet so magnificently out of place at the same time. "You actually came," she commented, approaching. "I promised, didn't I?" He smiled and then knelt to be at Matthew's height, who was in his special wheelchair. "You must be the famous Matthew. Your sister talks a lot about you." The boy blushed, but extended his hand confidently. "And you must be the mysterious penthouse guy. Helen talks a lot about you, too." "Matthew?" Helen felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Raphael laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to light up the air around him. "Really? And what does she say?" "That you're different from the other rich guests. That you really talk to her, not like she's a piece of furniture." Helen wished the ground would open up beneath her feet, but Raphael just smiled more broadly. "Your sister is very observant, and she has infinite patience with people who don't know how to use dessert forks correctly." Matthew laughed, immediately won over. "Can I pet your dog?" "Of course. Apollo, say hello to Matthew." The huge German shepherd approached the wheelchair with surprising gentleness, resting his head on the boy's lap. Matthew buried his fingers in the golden fur, his face lighting up with pure joy. Is he trained? Helen asked, observing the interaction. He is. Apollo was my companion through difficult times. A shadow passed over Raphael's eyes but quickly disappeared. So what's the plan? Are we still going to the park? Hyde Park was bustling that sunny Saturday morning. Families picnicked, children ran, couples strolled hand in hand. Raphael pushed Matthew's chair naturally, as if he had been doing it for years, while Helen walked beside them, Apollo following obediently. They bought popcorn from a street vendor, sat by the lake, and talked about everything and nothing. Raphael told stories of distant places he had visited, describing scenes with vivid details that made Matthew's eyes sparkle with fascination. The boy, in turn, shared his encyclopedic knowledge of astronomy, his passion since childhood. Helen observed their interaction, a knot of emotion growing in her throat. There was something so natural in the way Raphael talked to her brother, without condescension, without pity, just genuine interest. When Matthew asked to go to the bird observatory on the other side of the lake, Raphael looked at Helen with a silent question in his eyes. You can take him, she nodded. I'll wait here with Apollo. She watched the two walk away, Raphael carefully pushing the chair along the stone paths, occasionally leaning in to hear something Matthew was saying. A strange, warm feeling spread through Helen's chest, something dangerously close to hope. Your owner is special, you know, she commented to Apollo, who rested his head on her lap, looking at her with eyes almost human in their understanding. When Raphael and Matthew returned, the sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The boy looked tired but radiant with happiness. Raphael said I can visit the dog in the penthouse any day, he announced, looking at his sister expectantly. Can we, Lena? Please? Helen hesitated. Taking Matthew to the hotel as a social visit was a line she wasn't sure she should cross. We'll see, Matthew. Now we need to go home. It's getting late. Raphael seemed to understand her hesitation. I'll take you, he offered. I have a car waiting in the parking lot. We don't need to trouble you. It's no trouble, please. There was something in the way he asked, a disarming sincerity that made Helen give in. The car turned out to be a spacious and comfortable SUV with ample room to accommodate Matthew's folded wheelchair. The driver, a discreet middle-aged man, didn't seem surprised when Raphael gave the address of the modest apartment in Brixton. The drive home was filled with more stories, more laughter, Helen's initial tension gradually dissolving. When they arrived, Raphael insisted on helping with the chair, accompanying them to the apartment door. Would you like to come in? Helen offered, surprising herself. It's nothing compared to the Plaza penthouse, but I'd love to, he replied simply. The two-bedroom apartment was small but impeccably clean and organized. Photos of Helen and Matthew's parents adorned the walls, along with Matthew's medals and certificates from science competitions. The furniture was simple but carefully chosen to facilitate wheelchair movement. It's a beautiful place, Raphael commented, and there was no falseness in his voice. It has character. It tells a story. Our story, Helen smiled, a little embarrassed. I'll make some coffee. Matthew, time for your medication. While she was busy in the small but functional kitchen, she could hear Raphael and Matthew talking in the living room. The boy showed off his collection of astronomy books, explaining constellations and celestial phenomena with contagious enthusiasm. When she returned with a tray of coffee and biscuits, she found Raphael sitting on the floor helping Matthew with a small telescope they were trying to position at the window. Sorry about the mess, he smiled when he saw her. Matthew is explaining how to locate Andromeda to me. He does that with all visitors, Helen laughed, placing the tray on the coffee table. It's the test to see if the person is worthy of his friendship. I hope I'm passing, Raphael winked at the boy, who smiled back, complicit. They drank coffee as night fell completely outside. Helen observed how perfectly at ease Raphael seemed in that simple environment, so different from the luxury she presumed he was accustomed to. When Matthew started to yawn, Helen announced it was time for him to get ready for bed. Raphael offered to help, but she gently refused. It's our routine, she explained. He likes it to always be the same. While she helped her brother with his bath and nightly medication, Raphael waited in the living room, flipping through the family albums Matthew had insisted on showing him before going to sleep. "He's already asleep," Helen announced upon returning to the living room almost an hour later. "Sorry for the delay." "Don't worry." Raphael had an album open on his lap, a photo of teenage Helen with her parents on some beach. "You look like your mother." "Everyone says that." She sat beside him on the sofa, aware of their proximity. "Matthew has her temperament too, stubborn, curious, brave." "And whose do you have?" "My father's, they say. Practical, organized, a little distrustful." Raphael gently closed the album. "Thank you for today, Helen, for letting me see a bit of your world." "It was easier than I thought," she admitted. "You're good with Matthew. He's an amazing kid." Raphael paused. "It must be hard, taking care of him alone." Helen felt her throat tighten. She rarely talked about the daily challenges, the sleepless nights when Matthew had crises, the medical bills that accumulated, the constant fear of the future. "Sometimes," she admitted, her voice low, "the medications are expensive. The experimental treatment the doctor recommended is beyond our reach. And I'm afraid I'm not doing enough." Tears came without warning, hot and heavy. Helen tried to hold them back, ashamed to break down like this, but it was too late. Months, years of worry and exhaustion finally finding an outlet. Raphael said nothing. He simply pulled her close, wrapping her in a firm, gentle embrace. Helen allowed herself to be held, her face against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You're not alone," he murmured against her hair. "Not anymore." She lifted her face, tears still in her eyes, to meet his gaze. There was something there, an intensity, a silent promise that made her heart race. Without thinking, she leaned forward. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant. Raphael's lips were soft against hers, his large warm hands cupping her face delicately, as if she were something precious, something to be revered. Helen felt a wave of warmth spread through her body, temporarily drowning all worries, all doubts. When they finally separated, breathless, Raphael rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that ever since you fell into my arms in the hotel lobby." Helen laughed, a soft, trembling sound. "Even with the awful uniform and the severe bun? Especially with them." He smiled, caressing her face. "You're beautiful, Helen, inside and out." She wanted to believe him, wanted to surrender completely to that moment, but Lewis's voice echoed in her mind. "For them, people like us are pastimes." "Is this real?" she asked, hating the vulnerability in her voice. "Or am I just a curiosity, the receptionist who teaches the eccentric rich man how to use dessert forks?" The pain that crossed Raphael's eyes seemed genuine. "Is that what you think of me?" "I don't know what to think. There's still so much I don't know about you." He sighed, pulling away slightly. "You're right, and I promised that would change." He paused, as if organizing his thoughts. "Next Friday there will be an event at the plaza, a gala dinner to raise funds for medical research. I'd like you to go with me, not as an employee but as my guest." The proposal caught her off guard. "I can't just show up as a guest at an event at the hotel where I work. You can ask for time off. Please, Helen. It's important to me." There was something in his eyes, a silent plea she couldn't refuse. "All right," she finally agreed, "but I have nothing to wear to an event like that. Leave that to me." "No, Raphael, I don't want you to—" He interrupted her with another kiss, deeper, this time. "Trust me, please, just this once." And against all common sense, she trusted him. The following days passed in a blur. Helen asked for Friday off, citing a family commitment. Arthur, the manager, frowned but didn't question it. Her daily meetings with Raphael continued, but there was a new dimension now. Hand touches under the table, glances that lasted longer than appropriate, stolen kisses when they said goodbye. On Wednesday, a package arrived at Helen's apartment. Inside, a dark blue silk dress, elegant without being ostentatious, and a card with Raphael's now familiar handwriting. "For the most beautiful." woman who has ever crossed the plaza lobby. On Friday, Helen spent hours getting ready. She did her nails at home, styled her hair in a looser, more elegant bun than her uniform one, applied light but careful makeup. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. When the doorbell rang, her heart was ready to leap out of her chest. Matthew, who was with the caregiver that night, whistled softly when he saw her. "Wow, Lena! You look like a princess!" Helen laughed, nervous. "Don't exaggerate, you rascal." When she opened the door, she almost didn't recognize Raphael. He was impeccably dressed in a custom-made tuxedo, his usually disheveled hair now carefully combed, his 5 o'clock shadow replaced by a more polished look. He seemed like a stranger, except for the green eyes that looked at her with the same intensity as always. "You're stunning," he murmured, handing her a small bouquet of orchids. "You also look different," she replied, still processing the transformation. In the waiting car, Helen couldn't control her nervousness. "What if someone from the hotel recognizes me? It'll be weird." "Trust me," Raphael repeated, holding her hand. "Everything will be fine." The Grand Plaza was unrecognizable. The lobby where Helen worked daily had been transformed into a luxurious ballroom, with exotic flowers, soft lighting, and a live orchestra. Dozens of people circulated in formal attire, champagne glasses in hand, jewelry gleaming under the chandeliers. As they entered, Helen felt eyes turn to them. But, to her surprise, they weren't looks of recognition or strangeness. They were looks of respect, almost deference, directed at Raphael. "Mr. Wolfe," a middle-aged man approached, extending his hand. "It's an honor to have you with us tonight." "Dr. Davies," Raphael greeted with a formality Helen had never seen before. "Allow me to introduce Helen Miller." The doctor kissed her hand respectfully. "Charmed, Miss Miller." As they moved through the hall, the scene repeated itself. Important people, whom Helen recognized from magazines and newspapers, greeted Raphael as if he were someone of great importance. She realized with growing confusion that she was not seen as the receptionist, but as the companion of someone clearly powerful. "Raphael," she whispered when they had a moment alone. "What's happening? Who are these people? How do they know you?" He opened his mouth to answer, but was interrupted by the clinking of a glass. Everyone turned to the small stage set up in the center of the hall, where Arthur, the hotel manager, was at the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great honor that we announce the presence of the man who made this evening possible, the visionary behind the Grand Plaza hotel chain, the philanthropist whose generosity will fund the new medical research center. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Raphael Wolfe." Helen's world collapsed. As the crowd applauded and Raphael squeezed her hand one last time before going on stage, she felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The man she had known as the eccentric penthouse guest, the simple man who didn't know how to use dessert forks, the man she thought she was getting to know intimately, was actually the owner of the hotel where she had worked for 6 years. Through a veil of shock, she heard him talk about the importance of medical research, about how rare diseases like the one affecting a very special young man he had recently met deserved more attention and resources. The crowd applauded, enchanted by his eloquence and generosity. Helen didn't wait for the speech to end. With a broken heart, she grabbed her purse and quietly exited through a side door she knew well from her years working there. The cool night air hit her face like a slap, bringing tears she had held back throughout the event. She felt deceived, manipulated, used. All that time, all those conversations, all those moments she had believed to be genuine, had they just been a game for him? An amusement, pretending to be someone simple, winning the trust and heart of the naive employee? She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't notice the approaching footsteps. Helen. His voice, that same voice that had whispered sweet words in her ear days before, now sounded like a betrayal. "Stay away from me," she hissed, without turning around. "Please, let me explain." Raphael took a step towards her. She finally turned, tears streaking her face, which had been perfect just minutes before. "Explain what, exactly? How you lied to me for weeks. How you made a fool of me, asking me to teach you the rules of a world you practically own?" "I never lied to you," His voice was soft, almost pleading. I merely omitted certain information. That is lying, Raphael, she almost shouted, and you know it. I wanted you to see me. The real me, not the name, not the title, not the money. The real you? And who would that be? The scruffy man with a huge dog who doesn't know how to use cutlery, or the polished businessman who lectures high society about philanthropy? The words came out like venom. Which one is the real Raphael Wolf? He took another step towards her. Both. Neither. I don't know anymore, Helen. I've lived so long according to others' expectations that sometimes I forget who I really am. And you decided to use my life, my feelings, as an experiment to find out. The tears continued to fall. What else was a lie? The interest in my brother? The kiss? Everything? The pain in his eyes seemed real, but Helen could no longer trust her own judgment. None of that was a lie, especially not what I feel for you. And what exactly do you feel? She asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Curiosity? Amusement? The thrill of seducing an employee? Love, Helen? The word dropped between them like a bomb. I'm in love with you, she laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Love isn't built on lies. Love requires trust, mutual vulnerability. She paused, angrily wiping away her tears. You never trusted me enough to be vulnerable, to show me who you really are. How do you expect me to believe in this love? I was trying to protect myself, he admitted, his voice low. I've been hurt before. People who only approached me for what I had, not for who I was. And you decided I would be like that too, without giving me a chance to prove otherwise. The hurt was palpable in her voice. What hurts isn't that you hid who you were, Raphael. It's that you assumed I would be like everyone else, that I didn't deserve to know the truth. He tried to touch her face, but she pulled away. I was going to tell you. Tonight. That's why I brought you here. So you used me as part of the spectacle? You wanted to see my reaction when I found out everything in public? Helen shook her head, disbelieving. I'm leaving. Don't look for me anymore. Not me, not my brother. Helen, please, it's over. Raphael, whatever this was between us, it's over. With those words, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the garden under the cold moonlight. Back at the apartment, Helen cried until she had no more tears. Matthew, already asleep, didn't witness her heart breaking. The caregiver, a kind woman who had known the family for years, asked no questions when she arrived early, just offered a silent hug before leaving. In the following days, Helen requested a transfer to the night shift at the hotel. She couldn't bear to see Raphael in the corridors, knowing now who he really was. Arthur, apparently aware of the situation, granted the request without question. Louis, the bartender, became her silent confidant, listening to her in moments of weakness, never once saying, "I told you so." He started appearing more in her life, offering rides, helping with Matthew, being the friend she so desperately needed. "He keeps asking about you," Louis commented one night, almost 2 weeks after the incident. "He shows up at reception every day, hoping to find you." "He owns the hotel. He can check the roster and know I won't be there," Helen replied bitterly. "I think he's respecting your space, in his own way." Helen didn't respond. She didn't want to admit that a part of her, a foolish and romantic part, wanted Raphael to fight harder, to refuse to give up on her. "He sent something for Matthew," Louis continued hesitantly. "A professional telescope. The boy is over the moon." "I'll return it," Helen said automatically. "Maybe you should ask Matthew what he wants." Louis's words haunted her for the rest of the night. It was true that Matthew had asked about Raphael repeatedly in the first few weeks. Over time he stopped asking, but Helen had caught him several times looking out the window, as if expecting to see the man and his dog appear at any moment. The next night, while helping her brother get ready for bed, Helen finally brought up the subject. "You miss him, don't you?" Matthew didn't pretend not to understand. "He's nice, Lena. He treats me like a real person, not like a charity case or a problem." "He lied to us." "He hid things," Matthew corrected, with a wisdom that sometimes surprised her. "It's not the same thing." "Yes, it is, Matthew. Then you also lied to me. Every time you said everything was fine, when in reality you were worried about money or my tests." Matthew's words hit Helen like a punch. "It's different." "No, it's not." Matthew looked at her intently. "Sometimes we hide things to protect those we love, or ourselves." Helen had no answer for that. She kissed her brother's forehead and left the room, her thoughts in a whirl. That same night, while working at the quiet reception desk on the night shift, Helen received a call from the caregiver. Matthew had had a crisis. He was in the emergency room. Without a second thought, she asked a colleague to cover her post and rushed to the hospital. The scene she found broke her heart. Matthew, normally so strong despite his condition, was pale on the gurney, tubes and monitors all around him. The on-call doctor, not Dr. Paul, who knew the case, explained that the situation was serious. They needed specific tests, procedures that the plan didn't cover. Helen felt her world collapse again. She had no way to pay for all of it. When the doctor left, she slumped into the chair beside the gurney, holding her brother's cold hand, praying to any deity who might listen. "He's going to be fine." The voice made her freeze. Slowly, Helen turned and saw Raphael standing in the doorway, Apollo by his side, wearing what looked like pajamas, hastily covered by an overcoat. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice choked. "The caregiver called me," he replied simply. "I've had your number since the day at the park." Helen wanted to protest, wanted to send him away, but she had no strength. "They want to do expensive tests, procedures the plan doesn't cover. I don't have the means." "It's already being taken care of," he interrupted softly. "Dr. Paul is on his way. He'll handle everything." She stared at him, confused. "How did you—" "I know people, and I have resources. Please, Helen, let me help." At any other time, her pride would have refused, but not when it came to Matthew, not when his life was at stake. She nodded silently, tears streaming down her exhausted face. Raphael approached cautiously, as if fearing she might break him with a breath. When he saw she didn't recoil, he sat in the chair beside her, Apollo lying at the foot of the gurney like a silent guardian. "Thank you," she murmured after long minutes of silence. "Don't thank me," he replied, his voice hoarse. "I would do anything for both of you. Anything." And at that moment, in the middle of the night, in a cold, sterile hospital room, Helen began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. The days in the hospital dragged on like an eternity. Helen practically moved in, sleeping in the uncomfortable armchair beside Matthew's bed, leaving only for quick showers and to change clothes. The hotel had granted her emergency leave, and she was grateful for it. She couldn't work at that moment, not with her brother fighting for his life. Matthew had been diagnosed with a severe complication. His liver was failing, a late consequence of the genetic syndrome. He would need a transplant, and the waiting list was too long for his urgent case. Dr. Paul, now accompanied by a team of specialists Helen could never afford, explained that there was an experimental procedure developed by a Japanese doctor that could stabilize him until a compatible donor was found. "The cost is prohibitive," the doctor explained, with his usual gentle professionalism. "And it's not covered by any plan in the UK, but Mr. Wolfe has already arranged everything." Helen swallowed her pride. It was no time for refusals. If Raphael's money could save her brother, she would accept. They would settle accounts later. What she didn't expect was his constant presence. Raphael appeared every day, never imposing his company, always asking if he could come in, bringing decent food to replace the hospitals, books to distract her, and most importantly, being a solid presence when everything seemed to be falling apart. When Matthew was conscious, Raphael talked to him about astronomy, about video games the boy had never had a chance to play, about distant countries he promised to show him when he recovered. Helen observed these interactions from afar, her heart divided between gratitude and still not completely healed hurt. It was during one of these visits, almost 10 days after the admission, that the Japanese doctor finally arrived. Dr. Tanaka, a middle-aged man with a serenity that inspired confidence, examined Matthew meticulously before confirming that the boy was a candidate for the procedure. "We will prepare him for tomorrow," he said in heavily accented English. "The chances are good, but it's important to understand that it is still experimental." Helen nodded, squeezing Matthew's hand, who seemed simultaneously frightened and hopeful. "He's going to be fine," Raphael stated when the doctor left, his voice carrying a certainty Helen desperately wanted to share. "How can you be so sure?" she asked, too exhausted to hide her vulnerability. Raphael hesitated, something unusual for him. "Because I know the pain of losing someone you love, and I don't believe the universe would be so cruel as to make you go through that." There was something in his words, an old and deep pain that made Helen truly look at him for the first time in days. She noticed the dark circles under his eyes, his disheveled hair, the clothes that, though expensive, were rumpled as if he had slept in them. "You lost someone?" The question came out before she could stop it. Raphael looked away towards the window, where the sun was beginning to set over London. "My sister, Camilla, 5 years ago, autoimmune disease, diagnosed too late." The revelation caught her off guard. In all their conversations, he had never mentioned a sister. "I'm so sorry," she said sincerely. "That's why I created the Camilla Foundation," he continued, still looking at the horizon. "We fund research for rare diseases, experimental treatments, equipment for public hospitals. It's the way I found to give some meaning to her loss." Helen felt a knot in her throat. The foundation mentioned that gala night, the reason for the charity event. "Why did you never tell me about her?" Finally, Raphael turned to face her. "Because it still hurts. Because I still blame myself for not noticing the symptoms sooner, for being too busy building an empire to notice she was fading away." He paused. "And because you already had too many problems. I didn't want to burden you with mine." Something in that confession broke a barrier within Helen, a truth so raw, so vulnerable, that it couldn't be faked. "You should have told me," she murmured. "About your sister, about who you really are. I would have understood." "Would you really have?" he asked, an infinite weariness in his voice. "Or would you have seen me like everyone else? The boss, the billionaire, the man who can solve problems with money but couldn't save his own sister?" Before Helen could respond, a nurse entered to check Matthew's vital signs. He had fallen asleep. The moment broke, but something had changed between them. A small crack in the wall Helen had built around her heart. The next morning, Matthew was taken for surgery. The waiting hours were the longest of Helen's life. Raphael remained by her side in the waiting room, silent but present, offering coffee, water, anything that could help her endure the anguish. When Dr. Tanaka finally appeared, his face revealed nothing. "The procedure was a technical success," he explained carefully. "Now we need to wait to see how the body responds. The next 48 hours will be critical." Helen nodded, thanked him mechanically, and returned to the room where Matthew would soon be brought. Raphael followed her, maintaining a respectful distance. "You should go home and rest," he suggested gently. "I'll stay with him." "I can't leave him," she refused automatically. "Helen," Raphael's voice was firm but gentle. "You haven't slept properly in days. You're exhausted. You won't help Matthew if you get sick too." She knew he was right, but the idea of leaving her brother even for a few hours seemed unthinkable. "I promise I'll call you if there's any change," Raphael insisted. "And Apollo will stay here too. He's practically a trained nurse." He attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his tired eyes. Finally, Helen gave in. She needed a decent shower, a few hours of sleep in a real bed, clean clothes. Raphael called a driver to take her to the apartment, promising again that he wouldn't leave Matthew's side. At home, the silence was deafening. Helen took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away some of the accumulated tension. Then, too tired for anything else, she collapsed onto the bed, falling asleep. Almost instantly, she woke with a start hours later, her heart racing, fearing she had missed a call. But her phone only showed reassuring messages from Raphael. Matthew was stable, breathing on his own, vital signs good. She breathed a sigh of relief, checking the clock. She had slept almost 12 hours. She dressed quickly and ordered an Uber back to the hospital. On the way, a fine rain began to fall over the city, washing the polluted air, creating an almost melancholic atmosphere. Upon reaching Matthew's room, Helen paused at the door, surprised by the scene. Raphael was sitting, In the armchair she usually occupied, his body awkwardly large for the space, clearly asleep, Matthew, awake, looked at him with an expression that mixed amusement and affection. Apollo slept at the foot of the bed, like a faithful guardian. "He hasn't left here for a minute," Matthew said softly when he noticed her. His voice was weak, but his eyes had a sparkle Helen hadn't seen in weeks. Not even to eat. The nurse had to bring him coffee. Helen approached silently, kissing her brother's forehead. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, sore, but alive." Matthew gave a small smile. The Japanese doctor said the procedure worked better than they expected. She let out a sigh of relief she hadn't even known she was holding. "Thank God. And thanks to him." Matthew indicated Raphael with a nod of his head. "He's the one who brought the doctor, Lena. He flew all the way to Japan to convince him personally." The information caught her by surprise. Raphael had never mentioned a trip to Japan. It must have been before Matthew's crisis, perhaps soon after they met. As if feeling the weight of her gaze, Raphael woke, blinking in confusion for a moment before focusing on her. "You're back," he said, his voice hoarse with sleep. "You didn't tell me you went to Japan to get the doctor," Helen replied instead of a greeting. Raphael ran a hand over his face, trying to fully wake up. "It didn't seem important to mention." "It didn't seem important," she repeated, incredulous. "You traveled across the world to save my brother, and you didn't think it was important to mention." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the focus on his actions. "I did what anyone would do." "No, Raphael, it's not what anyone would do." Helen felt something warm spread in her chest. Something dangerously similar to what she had felt before that gala night, before everything fell apart. A silence laden with unspoken words settled between them. It was Matthew who broke it, with the disarming frankness that only teenagers possess. "You two should talk, really talk, outside." He pointed to the door. "Apollo and I will be fine alone for a few minutes." Helen hesitated, but her brother's determined look convinced her. Raphael got up from the armchair, his muscles protesting after hours in the uncomfortable position, and followed her into the corridor. They found a small empty waiting room at the end of the corridor. Helen sat on one of the plastic chairs, suddenly exhausted again. Raphael remained standing, as if he didn't quite know what his position should be. "Why did you do all this?" she asked finally. "Not just the doctor, everything, the specialist, the private room, staying here day and night." Raphael hesitated, his hands in his pockets, his gaze lowered. "You know why, Helen. I need to hear you say it." Her voice was firm, despite the whirlwind of emotions. He finally looked at her, his green eyes filled with a vulnerability she had never seen before. "Because I love both of you, you and Matthew. You became my family when I didn't even know I still needed one." The sincerity in his words hit her like a wave. "And what do you expect now? That I simply forget how you lied to me?" "I expect nothing." Raphael took a step towards her but maintained his distance. "I just wanted to help. I just wanted Matthew to be well. I just wanted—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I just wanted to do something right for the first time in my life." Helen felt the tears she had been holding back for days finally escape. "You hurt me, Raphael, deeply." "I know." He didn't try to justify himself, didn't offer elaborate excuses. "And I regret it more than I can express." "But you also saved my brother," she continued, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "How can I stay angry with you after that?" A small glimmer of hope lit up Raphael's tired eyes. "I'm not asking you to forgive everything now. Just, maybe we can start over, no secrets this time." Helen studied him for a long moment. The man in front of her was no longer the mysterious penthouse guest, nor the powerful businessman from the charity event. He was just Raphael, a tired, vulnerable, imperfect man who had moved mountains to save someone he loved. "Perhaps," she finally conceded. "But it will take time. And I need to get to know the real Raphael Wolf, all sides of him. Time is all I ask." A hesitant smile appeared on his face. "And I promise the real Raphael Wolf isn't as interesting as you think. Let me be the judge of that." Helen stood up suddenly, aware of how close she was to him. "Now let's go back. I don't want to leave Matthew alone for too long." Upon returning to the room, they found the boy dozing, Apollo still vigilant by his side. Raphael hesitated at the door. "I think I should go now. You're back, and I need to sort some things out at the office." Helen nodded, surprised by how much she didn't want him to leave. "Will you come back?" "If you want me to," he replied, the uncertainty evident in his voice. "I do," she admitted, and realized it was true. In the following days, they established a new routine. Raphael came in the morning, spent a few hours, and went to the office. He returned at night, often bringing dinner for the three of them. They talked, played cards when Matthew had energy, watched movies on the laptop Raphael had brought. Gradually, the barriers Helen had built began to fall. Raphael kept his word. No more secrets. He told her about his childhood as the son of a workaholic businessman and an absent socialite mother. About how he founded his own technology company at 22, against his father's wishes, who wanted to see him follow in his footsteps in the financial market. About how his sister's illness and death transformed him, making him question life's priorities. "After Camilla passed, I threw myself into work with even greater intensity," he explained one of those nights while Matthew slept. "I expanded my businesses, bought the hotel chain, built an empire, but it was empty. None of it mattered without someone to share it with." Helen observed him with new eyes with each revelation, the man behind the myth, with his insecurities, his flaws, his essential humanity. After 2 weeks of hospitalization, Matthew was finally discharged. The procedure had been a success, stabilizing his condition until a compatible liver donor was found. Dr. Tanaka himself, impressed with the boy's recovery, promised to continue monitoring the case remotely. Raphael offered his apartment for convalescence, arguing that it was more spacious and adapted for Matthew's wheelchair, but Helen gently refused. They needed the normalcy of their own home, the comfort of familiar things. "I understand," he accepted without insisting, "but at least let me help with transportation and adapting the apartment." This time Helen accepted. Within days, her small apartment had been equipped with ramps, grab bars in the bathroom, and a comfortable hospital bed for Matthew. Raphael hired a nurse for the periods when Helen needed to work, but he made sure she approved every decision, respecting her authority as sister and legal guardian. Returning to work was harder than Helen expected. The hotel routines seemed strange now, almost trivial compared to what they had been through. And there was the fact that everyone knew about her relationship with the owner of the chain. Rumors had spread like wildfire during her absence. "Ignore it," Louis advised when she mentioned the glances and whispers. "For they're just jealous." "There's nothing to be jealous of," Helen replied, though she wasn't so sure anymore. "Raphael and I are reconnecting." "If you say so." Her friend smiled, skeptical. The truth was, Helen didn't know exactly how to define what was happening between them. Raphael visited almost daily, always with Apollo, who had become Matthew's constant companion. They had dinner together, talked for hours, shared stories and dreams. But since the hospital, they hadn't exchanged even a touch beyond the occasional brush of hands when passing objects to each other. One evening, almost a month after returning home, Helen found Matthew writing something in his notebook with unusual concentration. "What are you doing, you rascal?" she asked, curious. "A letter," he replied without looking up. "For Raphael." Helen felt a chill. "Why?" Matthew finally looked at her, with a maturity in his gaze that always surprised her. "Because you two are too stubborn to admit the obvious." "And what would be the obvious?" "That you love each other." The simplicity of the statement left her speechless. "He still loves you. Anyone can see it in the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is noticing. And you still love him, even though you try to pretend you don't." Helen sat on the edge of her brother's bed, her legs suddenly weak. "It's complicated, Matthew." "Only because you two are complicating it." He carefully folded the paper and put it in an envelope. "He saved me, Lena, not just with the money and the doctor, but by being there, every day, telling stories, making me feel normal when all I wanted was to give up." Her brother's words deeply affected Helen. It was true. Raphael had been more than a financial benefactor throughout the crisis. He had been present, he had cared, he had loved. "What did you write in that letter?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "That you still love him," Matthew replied simply, "and that you're afraid to trust, but that he should make you see it's worth it." Helen didn't know what to say. Her teenage brother, who had spent so much time battling his own illness, had a clarity about feelings that she herself couldn't achieve. 2 days later, Helen was finishing her shift at reception when she felt the atmosphere in the plaza lobby suddenly change. Staff stopped what they were doing. Guests turned to look. She looked up from the records she was organizing and froze. Raphael stood in the center of the lobby, wearing jeans and the same simple blue shirt from the day they met. Apollo sat obediently by his side. In his hand, an envelope she recognized immediately. As she watched, paralyzed, he opened the envelope, took out the letter, and began to read aloud, so everyone could hear. "Raphael, my sister still loves you. I know this because I see how different she becomes when you're around. But she's afraid to trust again. You need to show her it's worth it. She deserves someone brave enough to show her to the world, not as a secret, not as an amusement, but as the incredible person she is. P.S. If you hurt her again, Apollo and I will come after you. Signed, Matthew." An absolute silence fell over the lobby. Helen felt her face burn as dozens of eyes shifted between her and Raphael. "Helen Miller," he continued, putting the letter away and taking a few steps towards the reception desk. "Your brother is right. I was a coward. I was afraid to show who I really was because I feared you would see me differently, that the money, the name, the social position would change the way you looked at me." She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Her heart was beating so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "But the truth is, you always saw me, the real me, behind the masks, behind the armor I built over the years." Raphael continued to advance slowly. "You taught me the value of authenticity, of honesty, of the courage to be vulnerable. And I almost lost all of that out of fear." He was now just a few steps from the counter. Helen could see every detail of his face, the intense green eyes, the small wrinkles that formed when he smiled, the 5 o'clock shadow that had intrigued her so much on the first day. "I'm not afraid anymore, Helen. I'm here, in the middle of the hotel I built, surrounded by people who know me only as the businessman, the boss, the millionaire. And I'm saying, for all to hear, that I love you. The most extraordinary receptionist, the most dedicated sister, the most authentic woman I have ever known." A collective murmur swept through the lobby. Helen saw out of the corner of her eye Arthur observing the scene with an expression that mixed shock and fascination. Louis, standing at the entrance of the bar, had a wide smile that clearly said, "Didn't I tell you?" "I'm not asking you to forgive me now," Raphael continued. "I'm not asking you to forget my flaws. I'm just asking for a chance to prove every day that I deserve your love, that I can be the man you deserve." He finally reached the counter, placing his hands on the cold marble, just centimeters from hers. "What do you say, Helen Miller? Is it worth trying again?" Time seemed to freeze. Helen knew her answer would change everything, not just for the two of them, but for Matthew, for her future, for who she was as a person. She could choose the safe path, protect her already wounded heart, or she could risk it, she could allow herself to believe again. The answer came as an absolute certainty from the depths of her being. Slowly, Helen walked around the counter until she was face to face with Raphael, with no barriers between them. Then, before everyone present, in a gesture that defied all the rules of professional decorum she had religiously followed for years, she rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. The kiss was brief, almost chaste, but loaded with promises. When they pulled apart, there were tears in both their eyes. "It's worth it," she whispered. It always was. The following months were transformative. Raphael sold the Plaza penthouse and bought a house in Richmond, spacious and accessible for Matthew's wheelchair, but without the ostentation Helen feared. She insisted on continuing to work, though now as a hospitality manager, using her experience to train new employees. Matthew, growing stronger every day thanks to continuous treatment, was accepted into a special astronomy program at UCL, realizing his dream of studying the sky and its stars. Raphael provided a driver and necessary adaptations so he could attend classes independently. The wedding took place on an autumn afternoon in the garden of their new home. A small, intimate ceremony, with Matthew escorting Helen down the makeshift aisle, Apollo walking proudly beside him, carrying the rings in a small pouch attached to his neck. Louis, now the bar manager at the plaza, served as best man. The caregiver, who had accompanied the family through their most difficult moments, was maid of honor. Dr. Paul and Dr. Tanaka, who had come specially from Japan for the occasion, were guests of honor. The vows, written by both, spoke not of perfection, but of acceptance. Not of fairy tales, but of real love, built day by day through mistakes and successes, vulnerability and strength. "I promise never again to hide who I truly am," Raphael vowed, holding Helen's hands in his. "And I promise always to see all of you, not just the parts that suit me. I promise to trust in our love, even when fear tries to convince me otherwise," Helen responded, tears shining in her eyes. "And I promise to always remember that the true luxury of life is not what we have, but who we are to each other." Their honeymoon was simple, a month in a beach house on the north coast of Cornwall, with frequent visits from Matthew on weekends. Raphael could have offered exotic destinations, exclusive resorts, but he understood that Helen's happiness lay in simplicity, authenticity, and the family they were building together. A year after the wedding, on a sunny spring morning, Helen woke with a strange feeling in her stomach. In the preceding days, she had been experiencing subtle nausea, inexplicable tiredness, and increased sensitivity to smells. While Raphael was still asleep, she took the test she had secretly bought the day before. 5 minutes later, sitting on the bathroom floor, she looked at the positive result with a mix of shock and joy. When Raphael found her there, silent tears streaming down her face, his first instinct was panic. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Is it Matthew?" Helen just held out the test to him, unable to form words. She saw his eyes widen as he understood, an expression of pure astonishment slowly transforming into the most radiant happiness. "Are you sure?" he asked, kneeling beside her on the cold floor. Helen nodded, finally finding her voice. "We still need to confirm with a doctor, but yes, I'm quite sure." Raphael hugged her tightly, as if he feared she might disappear. Against her hair, he murmured words of love, of gratitude, of promises for the future. "We have to tell Matthew," Helen said when they finally pulled apart. "He's going to be so happy to be an uncle." "We'll tell him today," Raphael agreed, helping her to her feet. "But maybe we should wait for medical confirmation before announcing it to the rest of the family." Family. The word still sounded strange and wonderful to Helen's ears. From an orphan raising a sick brother alone, she now had a husband, a secure home, and a baby on the way. A story so improbable that, if someone told it, she would doubt it was possible. Medical confirmation came the following week. Not only were they expecting a baby, they were having twins. A boy and a girl growing side by side, like promises of a future Helen had never dared to dream of. The pregnancy proceeded without major complications. Raphael transformed into an even more attentive husband, if that was possible. Matthew, delighted with the idea of being an uncle, spent hours researching names for the babies, creating theories about their personalities, planning all the things he would teach them when they were older. And then, in the early hours of a February morning, 9 months after that positive test on the bathroom floor, Helen gave birth to Michael and Camilla, the latter, a tribute to the sister Raphael had lost, a link between the painful past and a future full of hope. In the maternity ward, as she held little Michael in her arms, with Raphael beside her cradling Camilla, Helen felt a peace she had never known before. "Are you okay?" Raphael asked, noticing her contemplative silence. "I'm thinking about how life comes full circle," she replied, stroking her son's tiny hand. 2 years ago, I was just a receptionist trying to survive, taking care of Matthew, with no prospects beyond the next paycheck. And now?" Helen looked at the man beside her, at the daughter, in his arms, at the son in her own. "Now I understand that true wealth was never in black cards or hotel penthouses." "And where is it?" Raphael asked, though his eyes said he already knew the answer. "In being seen," Helen replied, remembering those first meetings at the park cafe. In being heard, in being loved for who you are, not for what you have or what you appear to be. Raphael leaned in to kiss her softly, careful not to disturb the sleeping babies. When he pulled away, he had that same intense look in his eyes from the first day when he held her in his arms in the hotel lobby. "Thank you for teaching me that," he murmured, "for showing me that beyond all the masks, beyond all the layers of protection we build, there is something more valuable, the courage to be authentic." Helen smiled, feeling her son breathe peacefully against her chest. "I think we learn together." Outside, the city continued its frantic rhythm. At the Grand Plaza, new guests arrived and departed. Staff followed protocols, life went on as always. But for Helen and Raphael, the world had changed forever, not because of wealth or status, but by the simple miracle of two people who, against all odds, found in each other the home they had always sought. A love story that began with a stumble in a luxury hotel lobby and culminated in a family built not on appearances, but on the most solid of foundations, the truth of who they really were, with all imperfections, all fears, and all the beauty that only reveals itself when we allow ourselves to be completely vulnerable before someone. And as the twins slept peacefully, oblivious to the extraordinary journey that had brought their parents to that point, Helen and Raphael exchanged a look that said more than any words could express, a look that promised that no matter the challenges the future brought, they would face them together, without masks, without secrets, only with the certainty that true love, when finally found, is worth every risk, every tear, every moment of doubt. A love that, like the stars Matthew so admired, shone more intensely precisely because it was born in the darkness.